Hello and welcome to Ephemera. I am fantasy author Katie Brisky.
And I am editor Jen R. Albert. We hope you have been enjoying our music courtesy of Alex White. Welcome if you're joining us for the first time. And welcome back to those of you who have visited our virtual home before. For those of you who are new, Ephemera is an award-nominated reading series tailored by Katie and myself.
Pre-COVID, we held events in the Glad Day Bookshop. And while we await our triumphant return, we are delighted to root ourselves in your fellowship and community every month, right here on YouTube. And we would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which I live and work is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. This land is covered under Treaty 13 and is part of the Dish with One Spoon.
And on the land on which I normally live and work is situated upon the traditional territories of the Erie, Neutral, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant. Additionally, this land between the Lakes Purchase 1792 between the Crown and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation.
Are we roots, shoots, or fruits? Settlers in particular often have a linear view of history. Events following one after the next, like laying bricks for a road, with ourselves comfortably at the terminus. The sweep of history has led to me sitting here in Toronto speaking to you tonight. Even if we're slightly bruised and bitter fruits, everything has led to this. Or has it? Sometimes I feel like a shoot. Like our generation has barely started budding, even as we run out of time against fascism and climate change and late-stage capitalism. I look at young activists like Hannah Edenshaw, a member of the Chickitney clan of the Haida Nation on Haida Gwaii, who joined 14 other youths in suing the Canadian government for inaction on climate change in 2019, when she was just 17. She calls tackling climate change the most important fight of our generation. Which brings me to the seventh generation principle. You may have heard of this. It's based on a Haudenosaunee philosophy. The idea is that the decisions that we make today should result in a sustainable world 7 generations into the future. 7 generations, nearly 2 centuries. We are the roots, working beneath the soil, down in the dark, nourishing the shoots and fruits to come. Everything has led to this? No, what we do now will lead to everything, for good or ill. If we do not act now, Hannah told the government, my people's entire way of life is at risk. Our language and culture is the land. And honestly, this is why I hate when often white privileged people call humanity a virus or a cancer. Despite making up less than 5% of the global population, Indigenous peoples protect more than 80% of its biodiversity. Humans aren't the problem. Colonialism, capitalism, greed, and dereliction of our duty are. So are we roots, shoots, or fruits? All of the above. We stretch 7 generations back and more. We are in a liminal state, uncertain what fruits will bear. And we're questing through the darkness to grow something new, to make choices that will see this earth well 7 generations into the future. And to that last point, I want to stress again the importance of Indigenous leadership and knowledge keeping to achieving climate justice. I encourage you to visit indigenousclimatehub.ca and www.indigenousclimateaction.com to learn more about how you can support Indigenous-led climate projects. Thank you.
So today, I was browsing my trusty copy of the Merriam-Webster Dictionary.
And I was flipping through the Oxford English Dictionary.
And I was amazed by how many meanings encapsulated the word root. It can mean the base of something, the origin of something, ancestors or progenitors, the essential core of something, not to mention a whole bunch of math, music, and computing terms.
And also plants.
Say, we haven't heard from our friend Plantington III for a while.
Indeed, funny that. I'm sure that's not foreshadowing. But it is my very great pleasure to introduce our first reader tonight. Shaoni C. writes speculative fiction. Their short stories have appeared in Uncanny Magazine, Podcastle, Nightmare Magazine, and elsewhere, and their poetry has appeared in Apparition Lit, Fantasy Magazine, The Deadlands, and other venues. Raised in Southern California, they hold a BA in English Literature and Linguistics from Swarthmore College. They spend their free time swing dancing and embroidering. Find them at ShaoniCWhite.com or on Twitter at ShaoniCWhite. Welcome! Thank you for being here tonight.
Hey everyone, I'm Shaoni, and this event gave me the opportunity to brush up an old piece of flash fiction, which I'm very excited to share. Because this is a live stream, I decided to choose a piece that is in small part about live streaming. So here we go. It's a tree, said Seven Needles glinting, holding up the knobbly sphere wreathed in hundreds of writhing filaments. What the fuck is a tree? Said the receptionist blankly. That's a great question, Needles said. They would have elaborated, but they were interrupted by the tree trying to eat the receptionist's face. Okay, eat probably wasn't the right word. It didn't have a mouth. What it did have was a bunch of twitching tendrils that were unnervingly eager to latch on to people's flesh. The scant fragments of ancient earthen literature archaeologists had been able to reclaim from the old cradle planet's rubble suggested that trees had tentacles called roots, which moved around in search of nutrients. Needles was a helix weaver, and this was their first attempt at the genetic resurrection of the extinct organism called a tree. Sorry, they said to the receptionist, who had fallen off his chair in the commotion. It gets a bit tetchy if it's left alone for too long. Needles wrestled the first draft back into their fanny pack. It was no larger than their fist, so it wasn't too hard to shove it in the pocket and zip it up, but they had to move fast before the roots latched onto their fingers. The receptionist stared up at them. Why would you make something that... Oh my God. Are you the person from the video? I was hoping to access the earthen artifacts room, they said in a valiant yet doomed attempt to pretend this conversation wasn't happening. Oh my God, you're the person who tried to recreate that extinct seagull, except it had, like, teeth. The DNA fragments archaeologists managed to recover suggest a rigid mouth component. Also, I was possibly drunk and possibly forgot the video was still streaming. So, I was hoping to look at the book, the physical one, I mean, the only non-digital text recovered from Earth, that one. Because there's this illustration of a tree that could be really helpful in making my next draft. The receptionist was not listening. And the pineapple. Oh my God, you're the helix weaver who tried to resurrect the pineapple. Oh no. Of all the things to become cringe famous on the intergalactic internet for, why did it have to be the pineapple? I have to go, said Needles. They hurried deeper into the archive before the receptionist could react. The ancient earthen book lay at the heart of the spaceship's labyrinthine structure. They'd been here many times before, but their breath still hitched when they approached the transparent case. They were glad to see that the pages of the book were still turned to the place they'd been in when they were last here. Needles leaned over the ancient object, gaze lingering on the faded drawing that curled in the margins of the text. The ink, preserved by the finest stasis technology the archivist had, still retained its colors, delicate greens and browns, the shades of which they couldn't quite name. They felt inexplicably annoyed that the illustrated tree had been shunted to the edge of the page. They wanted to see more of it, to get a sense of whether the tall, elongated shape was an artistic liberty or a reflection of biological fact. They stared until their eyes began to water, as if that would somehow make the drawing bloom. But of course, it didn't. It was just ink on paper. It wasn't what Seven Needles Glinting really needed, which was DNA. Their last few attempts at helix weaving had been public failures. They kept trying to recreate extinct organisms based on a few scraps of preserved biomatter, but there just hadn't been enough data. They ended up with what they thought were cool experiments and what other people called horrifying eldritch abominations. But all they wanted was to touch, if only for a moment, the cradle planet that was gone. And so they kept trying. But if they made another failure, the committee would pull Needle's grant funding, which is why they needed the tree to be a success. They grimaced. Their initial attempt didn't look anything like the illustration curling around the ancient text, and the reality was their next draft wouldn't be any closer. It was time for them to admit the thing that they'd kind of always known, which was that they were never going to perfectly replicate the DNA of the ancient tree. It couldn't be done. But maybe they didn't need to? The illustration in the book had no organic material in it, after all, but it was still beautiful. What if, instead of attempting to recreate the DNA, they resurrected something else? The tree's essence, they supposed. Tree-ness instead of tree. Seven Needles Glinting returned to their studio, deep in thought. They made a beeline straight for their hydrogen loom and got to work. Their next attempt ended with Needles sheepishly wiping a brownish ooze off of their tools. They had gotten overexcited and accidentally turned the whole thing into amino acid soup. After that, they were careful to fabricate the solemn solidity that a tree was meant to bear. Draft 3 turned out slightly better, but not by much. An inert gray hunk, barely distinguishable from stone. It was on the fourth attempt that they realized what was missing. They'd been trying to knit into being the ghost of an organism without acknowledging its original function. The precious few passages of earthen texts that had been successfully translated agreed firmly on the purpose of a tree: to allow the wind to tangle in its branches and form a rattling sigh. As a child, Needles had often lain awake in the dark, picturing ancient humans looking out into a different kind of night, one governed by the turning of the planet rather than by the flick of a switch. They had wondered how their ancestors had felt, huddling under the shelter of atmosphere-bound dwellings, listening to the tired chorus of the leaves and the breeze. No one knew whether Earth dwellers had understood the tree's dry language, only that the language had existed once upon a time. Now humanity lived in the endless night of space, companioned by more darkness than they'd ever known, but there were no trees to sigh outside their windows. On their fourth attempt, 7 needles glinting stitched the tree a mouth. The tree curled gently toward the nearest light and began to sing. And that's what I've got. Thank you all.
Thank you. My God, this was like the best take on trees I've seen. It's all of the foibles of academia and social media. I love it. Thank you so much for sharing with us. All right. So it's actually a really great segue from trees to like our tree friends in that story to our plant friend, Plantington the Third. And you know, it's been a while since we've had the pleasure of seeing Plantington. So those of you who love Plantington the Third, which is everyone, and those who have not met them, I thought I should invite them onto the Zoom.
Oh.
But wait, I think Plantington is feeling a little adrift lately. I think perhaps a little rootless.
Rootlessness. That's a terrible thing for a plant to feel.
Yeah, maybe they'd like to know more about some other fantastical plants. Share your favorite science fiction and fantasy plants in the chat or on Twitter, and let's see how many we can get to remind Plantington that they are not alone.
All right. What plants do you know from science fiction or fantasy?
I mean, I think
that you can tell us about.
I mean, I think we already know at least one.
At least one. Okay, and in the meantime, I am pleased to introduce our next guest, Peter Chiykowski. He is a writer, illustrator, designer, and general muckabouter living in North Vancouver. He has twice won the Aurora Award for Best Graphic Novel, and his writing, art, and memes have appeared or made mention in the Globe and Mail, Newsweek, Huffington Post, Entertainment Weekly, Last Week Tonight with John Oliver, and more. That's a very impressive list. His latest project is The House of Untold Stories, a book of 50 micro stories published by Andrews McNeill. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm still trying to erase the image of a seagull with teeth, and how you could put something that funny and horrifying into a story with a fragment as beautiful and profound as the purpose of a tree. What is the purpose of a tree? I'm still processing. I love it. That was a fantastic reading. And yeah, I was going to share just a short visual piece. So something that seems obvious when you hear my bio, but I only found out 6 months ago, is that I have ADHD. And my creative career has been me sort of chasing different creative impulses, and whatever passion project or creative project has really been speaking to me, that's what I work on. And I end up with a very strange fragmented resume of like memes and comics and humor and writing. And one of my insecurities as a writer for a very long time was that the novel or like longer form short stories are really, really important in the medium and are given a lot of literary weight. And I always had so much trouble sustaining motivation to write anything that long. And eventually I found my way to microfiction, and I found out that I loved it because I could start and finish a piece that felt self-contained and meaningful, and have it in a place where I wanted to share it with people before the motivation might shift to a different project. So I loved writing microfiction. It's something I could keep coming back to and experimenting with different themes. And one of the things that I do as someone who spends too much time on the internet is I spend a lot of time thinking about ways to get fiction to, I guess, be able to compete in an environment where memes can spread so quickly, where memes are so popular. And so I started writing short stories as little postcards that were being sent out into alternate universes and bounce around the internet. And eventually I started adapting some of those short stories into video formats for TikTok. My publisher wanted me to try TikTok, and I thought I'll give it a go. And I tried editing together random stock footage to compile kind of like a narrative to go behind the story, and hiring some voice actors to do some readings. And I ended up finding that I loved it, and that it was actually a really weird kind of therapy for ADHD. I spent a lot of time with trying to keep events in order in my mind, or having trouble keeping track of time. Time blindness has been a really big issue for me. And editing video and combining that with narrative fiction has just been such a soothing process, because I can take all these disparate images and all these disparate thoughts that are floating around my head or loose pieces of footage that don't seem to have a relation and stitch them into like an ordered sequence where now they make sense to me and now something meaningful emerges from that format. So I've been really enjoying editing together these like 60-second almost mini films from stock footage and hired narrators, sometimes narrating my own. And I want to share a 10-minute film festival of 10 mini films with a variety of subject matter. And the last two of them, which the Velvet Duke is the narrator for these, are two stories that have not been heard or shared in video format or heard in narrative format yet. So they're two premieres, I guess. And I'm excited to share these with you. Thank you.
When the fog came to our town, we heeded the warnings and gathered every day to count our numbers. How proud we were after a week with no one taken. How proud after a month with all of us accounted for. It was only when the fog cleared that we looked out at our proud town and saw too many empty homes. It was only then that we began to realize the fog had not spared us. We had simply forgotten the ones it took.
The Atlas Room contains every map of every place in every world. Every river, mountain, vale and village is captured on the lacquered globes, curled parchments and age-flaked tomes that line its shelves. The only way to find it is to become lost. So lost that you no longer remember where you came from nor care about where you are going. So lost that you are ready to close your eyes, point your finger and spin about its endless halls until your heart says, there.
Hello, flesh. Just an endless supply of meat arriving at your house. You don't sign up for it. It just appears. Meat in bags. Meat in boxes. Meat oozing through the vents. Crawling up the stairs with trails red and dripping. Use coupon code FLESHONENDING for 10% off.
The warlock cursed our town and left the demon-possessed doll in the square. We took it to the woods and buried it, but it was back by the time we returned home. We burned it in the blacksmith's forge, but again it reappeared. No matter how many times we destroyed or discarded it, it rematerialized in the same spot. So we built a furnace to run off the infinite supply of regenerating dolls. First we used it to heat the poorhouse in winter, and eventually the rest of the town too. This summer we're going to open a community kitchen. A few families are still coming around to the idea of living with hellfire in our midst. But the rest of us just wink and say, when life gives you demons, give them hell.
My routine gets me through the hardest days in the greenhouse. I wake up, I miss you, I make tea, and if the atmosphere readings allow, I spend 60 seconds outside watching the desert. I tend to our garden, I visit your sapling by the wading pond. Some mornings, the solitude wraps its arms around me for so long that I feel like I've fallen through a trapdoor inside myself, and there is nothing below it. On those days, I lose myself in the soil. I dig troughs for old seeds and hope they will sprout, or calibrate the harvester to collect fresh seeds for the vault. You know the tenuous balance here in the greenhouse, trying to cradle the future in your hands without crushing it. I admit I've let some duties slip. I still check the water filter, but the living quarters, it was easier to seal them off and sleep with the plants. Less air for the ox cycler to have to purify. I know you wouldn't approve. One day a salt storm or hailstone will crack the shielding and I'll have nowhere to retreat to when the atmosphere creeps in. But I can only fight so hard to live in a world without you in it. So here I am, fighting the quiet fight. I wake up, I miss you, I make tea, I tend to our garden. I visit your sapling by the wading pond. I think of you down there in the soil, becoming roots and fungus and worms, and it makes me less scared. If the end should come, I will be with you in the earth, in the garden, in the harvester, in the seed vault. Someday, somehow, we will be planted back into the world. And with you in it, it will be a world worth fighting for again.
The wizard's spell made it so anyone who said literally had their words come true. He wanted to teach us not to exaggerate or misuse language. Instead, we rebuilt the world with impossible superlatives and reckless metaphors. We made him eat his words, literally.
The camp medic says you don't have to tell anyone about your bite. It's just a surface wound. Any symptoms are an unrelated seasonal bug and should clear up soon. So for a week, it's the usual group supply runs, sharing meals in the mess tent, catching shut-eye in the communal quarters. But every day you get a little worse. And every day, someone else gets sick. And then you remember the first symptom of infection. False memories. And your camp doesn't have a medic.
Our climate scientists watched the frogs with concern. Their biology is tuned to the same environmental thresholds as ours, but with more sensitivity. When frogs die, humans know it's time to bail. Find a launch pad, a space-bound shuttle, a new planet, anywhere but here. So when the croaks of frogs vanished from the wetlands, the panic began. We swarmed the evacuation sites to fight for a place in the escape pods. Clawing open the doors, we found that the frogs had already claimed the shuttles, each one filled with a sea of softly breathing bodies in green and brown and yellow and beige. "We've been watching you," they said. "We realized that when humans start to pay attention, it's time for frogs to go. You had your escape plans. Why shouldn't we have ours?" And then the hatches closed, and we watched them take off, left alone in the silence where frogs once sang.
We have a tradition we hide from the city people. On the first new moon of the year, our village takes to the water with red sails that mark our boat safe from the Lady of the Shallows. We always bring one outsider with us. We must explain to them what we are doing before we lower them into the water. That's important. It's not the flesh she feeds on, you see. It's the fear. If she doesn't get her fill, she could come back early. She could take one of us. So please understand, it's nothing personal. Careful now. Mind the ropes as you go down. Yes, that's it. That's the fear. Our Lady will feed well tonight. Oh, don't curse now. You came to our sweet little village to tell us how quaint we are, to get your fill of our small town ways and go home with a story. Well, these are our ways. This is your story. It's not our fault you don't like how it ends. The enterovirus spread across the planet in days, forcing us to speak only in questions. Have you heard? How are you? What's wrong? Can I help? For many of us, it's a reprieve. We feel like we're finally listening instead of waiting for our turn to talk. Today, I finished developing a cure, but I've decided to sit on it a while longer. The world could use a few more sick days.
Thank you, Peter. That was wonderful. What a brilliant array of fiction.
So great.
Thanks very much.
And of course, I loved the plant one, partly, because it's thematic, but also because I cried.
That was very touching. I love the range of genres and everything. So good.
So there's more plants that we can share with Plantington III, but did we get others to help them?
So many. Audrey II, Little Shop of Horrors, Yggdrasil from mythology. I don't actually know how to pronounce that. Read it a million times. Giant beanstalk. There you go. Still can't pronounce it apparently. Giant beanstalk, swamp thing, treebeard, Groot.
Well, that all seems to have helped Plantington III a bit. I'm afraid I'm not very good with plants. I've barely managed to keep my spider plant alive.
Well, we probably have some gardeners in the audience, and it is gardening season. So everyone, what is your number one tip for keeping plants happy? Share it in chat or on Twitter. Plantington III needs your green thumbs.
And while we dig up some advice, allow me to introduce our next reader. Ally Pelphrey is a queer writer, AV engineer, and community activist from the American South. She currently helps the CosmoQuest team put science in your brain on The Daily Space, a podcast and TV show airing in multiple cities. She has been writing fiction since she could hold a pen, but is new at putting her stories out into the world and hopes you enjoy them as much as she does. When she isn't writing, she can be found watching Murdoch Mysteries reruns with her wife and their 6 cats in their cozy Philadelphia apartment. Welcome, Ally!
Hi! Okay, so I don't know if the story fits the theme. It kind of does. It's a Southern Gothic story. It's set in Georgia, where I'm from, so it's more about my roots. So yeah, I'll just dive right into it. No pun intended. It's about a lake. Sorry, this is my first time reading my fiction in public, so a little nervous, but get through it. Okay. I didn't want to go to the lake, only because my mother was being particularly dramatic about it. Another body was found in the lake that morning, which made 4 bodies this summer, and it was only June. Mom said don't go to the lake, especially in summertime when the sun is bright and people crowd the shore. If you swim too far out, she said, the lake will pull you down. Down, down, and if you're lucky, it'll spit your dead body back out onto the mud. Otherwise, it'll keep you as long as it likes. The lake is always looking for new flesh to fill its towns and graveyards, she said, but it only keeps the worthy. Mom was always dramatic like that, and I usually didn't pay her any mind, but I really didn't want to go to the lake either. Still, later that day, I found myself crammed between 2 friends in the backseat of a car with no air conditioner, our bare thighs sticking together in a way I tried not to think too much about, while some boy I didn't know drove us too fast up the highway. The inside of the car smelled like sweat, sunscreen, and gas station ice. We didn't talk about the body found in the lake that morning. We settled on a scrap of empty beach that was all sun-warmed pebbles under our towels. The water lashed the shore with more force than was normal on a clear day. I said as much to my friends, but they just laughed that my mom had put ideas in my head again. I couldn't take my eyes off the water. It looked like claws. My friends left me there while they stripped down to their swimsuits and clambered into the water. I tried not to look too long at my best friend in her bikini. Her laugh carried over the water back to my ears as she raced that boy to a buoy marking the boat lanes. I couldn't remember the boy's name. My best friend's thigh had felt so soft against mine back in the car. The water curled around my ankles, gently scraping the tops of my feet like a cat trying to get my attention as it receded. It repeated the motion 1, 2, 3 times. Its grip on me tighter than the last. The water wanted me. I should have felt scared, but I didn't. I was so entranced by the water around my feet, I almost didn't hear my friends scream. They rushed onto shore in a fury of splashes and shouts. I tried to stand up, but the water held me rooted to the pebble beach. I was temporarily forgotten by my friends as they talked in rapid-fire, fearful tones. Hands on their ankles, they said, dragging them down, a voice in the water telling them to get out. I heard the same voice telling me, come closer. I blinked and I was chest deep in the water. I could hear my friends yelling my name from the shore. They sounded so far away. Clawed hands raked up the backs of my legs to grip my waist. Come closer, the voice whispered again. I collapsed into the water, feeling the lake bed give way underneath me. 2 clouded eyes gazed back at me through the silt, cold, slimy skin pressed against my forehead. Clawed hands cradled me, pulling me deeper into the water. A gaping mouth full of jagged teeth grinned at me, and I grinned back. She was the most beautiful thing I ever saw. And that's it.
I can't even find the unmute button because I have so many emotions about this.
So just, I should have said this before I started reading, just some quick background for folks who aren't from Georgia. Like, I based this on Lake Lanier, which is a lake in like North Georgia that is, it's an artificial lake that was formed over like a town where a lot of people were displaced to form the lake. So there's whole neighborhoods, there's a racetrack, there's villages and graveyards at the bottom of the lake. And I think I was looking at the statistics on it, like 200 people have died or gone missing since 1994 in the lake. So it's like there's a lot of stories around it. So I kind of wanted to play with that, and also I really love the idea of like a siren.
Yes, absolutely. So yeah, actually, like, as you know, with our themes, we encourage all of the takes on them, and I love that one.
That's a really great take.
Yeah, one that's been at your core. It's part of the heart of you. And I totally wrote down, the lake is always looking for new flesh, but it only keeps the worthy. I was just like, my heart. Before I expire, thank you very much, Ally.
Thank you.
I have also learned a lot about gardening.
Me too. Did you know that you should sing to your plants, make your own fertilizer, keep pothos because they're really easy to keep and hard to kill. That's my trick. Thanks for that one. Don't overwater because most plants die due to overwatering. This is true. And Kari has come in with Carly's method. Threaten your plants with torture and destruction if they don't grow, and execute the most inadequate of the plants in front of all the other plants.
We've also had an addition on Twitter from Rob, who says he did a science experiment playing various music to see which one helped them grow best. And classical was supposed to be the best, but it was the Batman Forever soundtrack that did the best job. And I've also just remembered that Roots is also a store. But also, I'm thinking about something that you said at the beginning and something we just mentioned now, just that roots can also mean the essential core of something.
Oh yeah, as in the heart. Often used in the phrase at root.
Well, what if we shared the stories that are at our roots? The stories and books that found a place in our hearts, the ones that make our essential core. I bet it would really help ground Plantington III. Share away on Twitter and in the chat.
And now we have our final reader this evening, Claudie Arsenault. Claudie is an easily enthused aerospec and asexual writer with a never-ending cycle of obsessions, but an enduring love for all things cephalopod and fantasy, together or not. She writes stories that center platonic relationships and loves large casts and single city settings. I hope everybody is enthused for our next reader. Thank you for being here, Claudie.
Hello, yes, hi, thank you for having me. I I almost. This is stress. I also do not have a lot of experience reading, so hopefully it will go as good as Ally did. But when I heard that the theme was root, I immediately thought about what that could mean for me. And the first thing that came to mind was like my family, my language, the parties we had when I was young. So I decided to read something from Baker Thief, which I kind of already had in mind because it's the city it's set in is heavily based in Quebec City, where I have always lived. But also I chose a scene between two sisters that kind of encapsulates everything I loved about my childhood. So it's very Quebec centered, you will note that. And we kind of catch the two sisters as they are sitting down to have dinner. So here we go. They moved into the dining room, and it was all Adele could do not to gasp. The massive table could have held 15, and heavy wooden chairs flanked it, with soft red cushions. A large chandelier occupied one hand, shedding bright light on their silverware. And amidst all that luxury, in a big iron pot, the most traditional of their mother's meals. Tourtière, Adele exclaimed. I can't believe it. I haven't eaten any in I don't even know how long. I figured. So I wrote Mom and asked her the recipe. What you have here, my dear Adele, is my first attempt at a duclos tourtière, as per traditions handed down through our ancestors by the lac. It looks delicious. I can't wait to taste it. Well, then don't. Adele hurried to the table, and within minutes she had 2 spoonfuls in her plate. 3 types of shredded meat and stew with small potatoes and spices for hours, all wrapped in a delectable crust. She breathed in the greasy, homey scent before reaching for the sweetened canned beets and tomatoes and pouring a ton on the corner of her plate. Emmanuelle laughed at the heavy addition. She never put anything on her tourtière, going as far as calling them contaminants. With the delicious meal came a red wine so deep it seemed to absorb the candlelight. Adele had no doubts about its quality. She dove into her plate. After the quick and cheap meals she'd eaten all week, this dinner was an explosion of flavors and memories. She relished each bite of the sweet beets mixed with the salty goodness of the tourtière, and for a moment her conversation with Em gave way to food and wine. When they restarted it, though, they talked of their youth growing up around the lac Saint-Damas, of their mom's small house on its bank and the first spring dip in its cold water, of David's wooden cabin in the great oak tree, of picking up blueberries in the fall, along with that one time Adele had devoured so much she'd been sick. One memory led to another, until they'd retold every classic family story in the repertoire, laughed at the endless antics of 6 children in the same house, and drank almost 2 bottles of the wine. Adele had no idea what time it was, or if she could take 2 steps without falling, and she didn't care. A happy buzz covered her thoughts, erasing the stress of the last few days. Em brought it all back with a single question. But enough of the past. How has the city been treating you? Heaviness crashed back on Adele's shoulders. She grimaced, inebriated enough not to try to hide her pain. Badly. She sighed, filled her glass with the last of the bottle, and leaned forward, elbows on the table. Some purple-haired thief broke into my flat the night before I started working and stole my exocore. Couldn't stop her, and now some high-placed chump wants her in jail. She's my first special case, but I'm only there as a colleague's shadow. Isn't that a good thing that you've seen her? Won't it make her easier to find? Well, she had a mask. Unless someone's parroting and light a cat hair around Valdemar, it won't help me much. Thievery cases are the hardest because of how little clues they leave behind, and if I fail this one, they'll shove me back into a moldy underground office with a shitty job. I can't let them down. Relax, you'll do great. It's not even your case, Adele. Breathe deeply, calm down, and contribute however you can. Besides, if thieves are so hard to jail, they'll understand if it takes them time, no? Well, they might. Adele avoided looking Em's way. Her sister was already trying to cushion her potential future fall, to break the pressure she was putting on this particular case. I just don't want them to have to. Adele, Have you ever been to the Croissantois? That was the least subtle change of subject in existence, but Adele didn't care. She knew the lecture that would come about putting too much pressure on herself or too much weight on a single event, and thought it was unhealthy behavior, but she'd already made her name and fortune. That single event had happened for her, and she no longer needed recognition from her peers. It's a nice bakery near my flat. We weren't talking about with an even nicer baker, Adele continued, pushing the topic firmly into a territory that would catch her sister's attention. Oh, Em perked up, a knowing smile spreading on her lips. How nice. Adele would regret this maneuver. Em loved romantic gossip too much to let her hear the end of it anytime soon. But, well, Adele had clung to fresh croissant, hot coffee, and friendly talk all week. Claude's tranquil warmth was an oasis of calm in her rough days, a feeling Adele already cherished. She would be a fool to deny she'd love to know him better, maybe even start something with him. His name is Claude. He's peaceful and kind, always has my coffee ready in the morning, and listens to me ramble. I know I'm a customer, but he kind of treats me like an old friend, like my coming to the bakery is a personal pleasure to him. Em clapped her hands, and Adele suspected she just fought her desire to scream. Maybe it is personal. You're cute and bright and entertaining. He ought to see that. In addition to cute and bright and entertaining, Adele turned a deep shade of red at the idea that Claude's kindness could hide something else. Had he noticed her? He treated everyone with the same care. Part of his job, part of who he was. Surely Em was just getting ahead of herself and imagining things. Adele cast her gaze about, looking for another convenient topic change, and spotted a calico cat slinking through the room. Its fur was extremely short and wavy, and Adele didn't remember ever seeing it around. Who's the new cat? That's Aurora. She's very friendly, and petting her feels like sweat, but she's nowhere near as interesting as your baker. You should ask him out. Aurora, you said. Adele replied while her mind all but panicked at the idea of asking Claude out. They barely knew each other. She grabbed her glass of wine and downed it, hoping to camouflage parts of her flush. Emmanuel was just not so easily duped. You heard me, Adele Duclos, and I won't let Aurora be your distraction. Why not? Really, go on a date. It'll be fun. And you'll get to know him elsewhere than at work. It could evolve into something more. Who knows, you might even add sexy to his list of qualities there for a while. Well, one can hope. Em laughed at her answer, and Adele cursed herself. She hadn't meant to imply that she was that interested. She was, but did Em need to be encouraged? Hell no. Besides, Claude might never draw any further of desire from her. He had a beautiful smile and laugh, and was easy on the eye, but her mind balked at the idea of kisses or more this early on. They hadn't known each other that long, and she was demisexual. Strangers did not raise goosebumps across her arms or send her heart hammering with want. When it happened to her, it was with people she felt deeply connected with, and it was wrapped in a need for a different kind of intimacy. Even without that attraction, though, her romantic interest in Claude was undeniable. One look at Em's insistent stare warned Adele her sister demanded more than a vague agreement, and wouldn't let go until she had a concrete promise. All right, I'll set something up with him and investigate. Are you happy now? Sure am. It'll be good for you. You can let off some steam from your work. Adele wondered if she would be exchanging one type of stress for another, but she pushed the thought away. She didn't want to rush Claude and could pick something casual from which either of them could escape with ease. It would be great fun. Simple. Exactly what she needed these days. With a slight smile, Adele raised her glass of wine to my future date, then, and clicked it. May Claude the baker prove worthy of your attention. They drank to that, the last of Adele's wine joining the rest of the alcohol in the pit of her stomach and the heavy, eddy spin of her mind. Walking home tonight promised to be its own adventure. And voila, that's it. This is part of, I don't remember if I said at the beginning, this is like chapter 6 or 7 in Baker Thief, which is an entire novel about Adele and Claude.
Thank you so much. You've captured so perfectly the flow in conversation between sisters who know and care about each other very much. It just felt so, yeah. I was like, I've been there. I've had that conversation. Oh, that was wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Well, that story awoke a lot of emotion in me. Again, like my weakness is sister stories, and I feel like there's going to be more emotion to come.
Yes, possibly.
All right, well, I shall prepare. Let us bring up Plantington the third.
There you are. There we are. So we shared a lot of great examples, like The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, Wedwall, fairy tales of all kinds, The Lord of the Rings from Peter. I really loved Pinocchio when I was young.
I've got The Princess and the Goblin, Le Petit Prince. Yeah, and look at them go. Look at them go, this little plant here.
Oh, they're growing. They're growing slowly, but they're going.
And they have a secret for us. Their roots, their heart, their essential core, it's this wonderful community.
Aww.
Yeah, which has given them so much rich soil in which to grow. So thank you for your friendship and the reminder, Plantington the Third.
Thanks, Plantington. It's always a good time. Okay, and here are readers. Thank you, everyone. Until next time, please don't forget to follow us on Twitter and Facebook at Ephemera Series, and please subscribe to this YouTube page. We'd like to thank the Ontario Arts Council and the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers of America for their funding assistance.
And as we close out tonight, we'd also like to thank our fabulous reader and artist, composer Alex White, our friends, families, loved ones, and you. Thank you all for staying with us. We will see you for our next event on June 15th, right here on YouTube.
Thanks, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.